A worn-out waitress dozes off on a stranger's lap during a late-night subway ride, only to wake up to his icy. But on certain afternoons, when she stood alone in the linen room folding sheets so white they seemed to hold their own light, she would look at her hands and feel something inside her stiffen, not anger, exactly, but a quiet fear of becoming invisible even to herself. A servant who could be replaced by any other servant. A human in a palace that did not truly need humans. The Vampire King, they said, rarely came into the day halls. He ruled from the upper floors and the shaded gardens beyond the inner courtyard. His decrees came down like weather, measured, inevitable, and impersonal. No one spoke of cruelty. The word they used was distance, as if it were a law of nature. Mira did not need the king to be frightening to feel the weight of him. It was enough to know that the palace belonged to someone who had lived long enough to forget what it was to worry about rent. Still, there were human corners here. The servants' stairwell smelled of bread. The laundry room held laughter when the overseers weren't near. In the mornings, an older gardener named Thomas hummed as he trimmed herbs that would never be used in vampire kitchens but were grown for the human staff: rosemary, thyme, mint. He said the smell helped him remember he had a body. "Breathe it in," he told Mira one day, offering her a sprig of mint with dirt still clinging to the root. "This place can make you float if you let it. Like you're only a shadow doing chores. Don't float." Mira pressed the mint between her fingers until the scent rose sharp and clean. "How do I not float?" Thomas shrugged, as if the answer were both simple and hard. "Do one thing each day that reminds you you're choosing to be here. Not only surviving here. Choosing." The word stayed with her. At first, she didn't think she had choices. She followed the rules: never enter the upper galleries without invitation, never speak to a royal without being addressed, never wear strong perfume, never leave a window unlatched before dusk. She learned to arrange the dining hall with a precision that felt almost like prayer: silverware lined, glasses gleaming, chairs placed exactly one hand's width from the table. The vampires who passed through the corridors were not monsters. They were simply still. Their faces held little wasted motion. Their voices were soft. When they looked at Mira, it wasn't with hunger or contempt, but with a polite disinterest, as though she were part of the architecture. It was the humans who carried the sharpest edges. The steward, Mr. Halden, ran the palace staff with the kind of efficiency that made people swallow their complaints. He was human, impeccably dressed, his hair always smoothed back. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. One afternoon in early autumn, when the palace was preparing for the Night of Concord, a diplomatic gathering between noble houses, Mira was assigned to the storerooms beneath the east wing. It was simple work: count linens, check inventory, ensure nothing was missing. She was grateful for the quiet. The storerooms smelled of cedar and clean cloth. There were no footsteps echoing behind her, no eyes on her hands. She had just finished tallying the fresh tablecloths when Mr. Halden entered, his shoes soundless on the stone floor. "Mira," he said, as if they were discussing the weather. He held out a ledger. "Sign here." She took the ledger automatically, then hesitated. The page listed deliveries: bottled spring water for the human quarters, sacks of flour, lamps, soap, bandages. Mira had checked those shelves. They were not full. "Sir," she said carefully, keeping her voice low out of habit. "These items weren't delivered." Mr. Halden's expression didn't change. "The ledger says they were." Mira's throat tightened. She imagined Thomas in the garden, his hands stained with earth, humming to himself. She imagined Hannah in the laundry room, saving scraps of candle wax so the servants wouldn't sit in the dark. She imagined her brother in their small room across town, swallowing medicine that made him drowsy and nauseated. If she signed, she would keep her job. If she didn't, she could be dismissed, and the palace would swallow her absence without notice. "I can recount," she offered. "Maybe I missed a shelf." "You did not," Mr. Haldane replied, still mild. He leaned closer, just enough for the message to land without becoming a threat. "You are new. The palace requires smooth preparation for the night of concord. We do not create problems. We solve them quietly." Mira held the pen. Her hand shook, not from fear of him, exactly, but from the exhaustion of being a person with needs in a world that preferred smoothness over truth. She thought of the subway stranger's voice. "Rest?" As if dignity were allowed. She set the pen down. "I'm sorry," she said. "I can't sign what isn't true." For a long moment, the storeroom felt colder. Mr. Haldane looked at her as though she had spoken in another language. "You understand," he said, "what it costs to be difficult." Myra's cheeks burned. Difficult. She had spent her entire life trying not to be difficult. The kind of girl who didn't complain when the diner manager scheduled her on her only day off. The kind of sister who smiled so her brother wouldn't see fear. Her voice came out steady anyway. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm trying to be honest." Mr. Haldane's gaze flicked past her shoulder, and for the first time, something like caution crossed his face. Mira turned instinctively. At the far end of the corridor beyond the storeroom door, half hidden by an archway, a figure stood in the dim light as if it belonged there. The air seemed to still around him. He wore dark clothing that didn't catch the light, and his posture was unhurried, almost weightless. A royal. Not a guard. Not a messenger. Something higher. Myra's heart stuttered, but she didn't bow quickly enough. She wasn't thinking about etiquette. She was thinking, absurdly, of how tired she had been on that subway, and how a stranger had let her be human for a moment without punishing her. The figure did not approach. He did not speak. His face was hard to read at that distance, but his attention was unmistakable, quiet, precise. Mr. Haldane cleared his throat. "Your Majesty," he said, and the words dropped into the air like stones into water. Myra's mind went strangely blank. Majesty. Vampire King. She lowered her gaze, not out of fear but out of the sudden awareness of her smallness in the world's hierarchy. The king's voice, when it came, was calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. "What is the matter here?" Mr. Haldane's hands remained folded behind his back. "A simple inventory form, sire." "The girl is inexperienced." Mira surprised herself by speaking. It wasn't brave in the dramatic way stories pretended bravery was. It was more like a reflex, a muscle used because the alternative was to let herself be erased. "The inventory is incorrect," she said softly. "I checked the shelves." Silence followed. Mira could feel the beat of her own pulse. She expected ridicule or dismissal. She expected to be told, in some polished words, that humans did not correct kings. Instead, the king said, "Show me." It was not a demand. It was an instruction given as if honesty were a practical thing, not a moral performance. Mira walked to the shelves with her raw hands and her plain servant's dress. She pointed out the missing bandages, the half-empty soap crate, the space where the flour sacks should have been. She did not embellish. She did not accuse. She simply showed what was. Mr. Haldon's face had gone pale. "Sire, these supplies were allocated elsewhere." "Without record," the king said. His tone remained even. "Correct?" Mr. Haldon swallowed. "Yes, your majesty." The king looked, briefly, in Mira's direction. There was no warmth in his expression. No praise. But there was something else, recognition, perhaps, in the way one recognizes a clear bell tone in a room full of muffled noise. "Honesty keeps a house standing," he said, not to her specifically, but to the air itself. "See that the ledger is amended. And see that the human quarters receive what is owed before nightfall." He turned away as quietly as he'd appeared, and the corridor swallowed him. When his footsteps faded, Mira realized she was shaking. Mr. Haldon exhaled as if he'd been holding his breath. His eyes were sharp now, stripped of their politeness. "You," he said under his breath, "have made yourself noticeable." Mira lifted her chin. Her fear was still there, but it had shifted. It was no longer fear of being punished for existing. It was fear of losing herself. "I was already here," she said. "I'm allowed to be true while I'm here." Mr. Haldon stared at her, then took the ledger from her hands with a stiff motion and left without another word. For the rest of the day, Mira moved through her tasks as if her body were slightly unfamiliar. She expected whispers, reprimands, perhaps the quiet punishment of worse assignments. She expected to regret her choice. Instead, evening brought a crate of supplies to the servants' hall, bandages, soap, flour. Someone had also included a tin of salve for chapped skin, the kind her mother used to buy when they were children. No note. No signature. Hannah found Mira near the kitchen doorway and pressed the tin into her palm. "It came with the deliveries," she whispered, eyes wide. "They said it was, for you." Mira stared down at it. The tin was plain, but it felt heavy with meaning. Not a reward. Not a promotion. Just a quiet acknowledgement that she had been seen, and that her hands mattered. That night, Thomas handed her a cup of mint tea and nodded at her knuckles. "Don't float," he reminded her gently. Mira rubbed a small amount of salve into the cracked skin, feeling the sting soften into relief. "I didn't," she said. Over the next weeks, she noticed small shifts, like changes in wind direction. Mr. Haldon no longer assigned her to errands that required signatures she couldn't verify. A young footman who had been coughing for days was given permission to rest, rather than being told to work quietly. The human quarters received their supplies on time. No one spoke of the storeroom incident, but the palace felt, just slightly, more breathable. Mira kept working. She folded linens. She polished brass that didn't need polishing. She learned which corridors stayed warmer in winter and which windows rattled in rain. She listened when Hannah confessed she missed her mother's stew and didn't know how to make it the same way. She brought Thomas extra twine for his vines. Her life did not become a fairy tale. She did not become anyone's favorite. She did not rise above her station in a dazzling moment. What changed was quieter than that. She stopped apologizing for taking up space. When she walked through the grand hall carrying a tray, she no longer held her breath as if the air belonged to someone else. She breathed as Thomas had taught her, mint and rosemary and all the ordinary scents that reminded her she was alive. Once, near twilight, she caught sight of the king at a distance in the upper gallery, only a silhouette against a tall window, still as a statue. She did not wave. She did not bow dramatically. She simply paused, steadying the tray in her hands, and inclined her head in a calm, respectful nod. The king did not approach. He remained what he was, distant, powerful, wrapped in the palace's mysteries. But as Mira turned away, she felt something settle inside her, like a thread pulled taut and tied off properly. The world could be ruled by beings who lived for centuries and drank from silver cups. Corridors could be lined with portraits older than her family name. She could still be human within it, tired sometimes, uncertain sometimes, but capable of choosing truth. On a rare day off, she took the tram down into the city to buy ink and paper. The subway platform smelled of metal and rain. When the train arrived, she stepped inside and found a seat by the window. A man stood nearby, reading. Another woman nodded off against the glass. The world swayed the way it always had. Mira watched the blur of tunnel lights and thought of that long-ago night when her exhaustion had made her careless and a stranger had made her safe. She did not know if the king had been that stranger. She would probably never ask. Some mysteries did not need to be solved to be meaningful. As the train rocked forward, Mira rested her head back against the seat, not on anyone's lap this time, but with the same permission in her chest. Rest, she told herself. Not because someone powerful allowed it, but because she had earned it by holding on to her own honesty. When she returned to the palace on the hill, the corridors were as quiet as ever, the chandeliers glowing softly. She walked through them with steady steps, her hands healed enough to feel the warmth of the air. She was still a servant. Still ordinary. But she no longer felt unnoticed by herself, and that, she realized, was a kind of nobility no throne could grant or take away.